Hey guys, Martial Apologist here. I'm gonna try and go through what is an attempt, my best attempt, at answering the problem of evil. And it's not easy. It's probably legitimately the most difficult confrontation against any religion that exists. Maybe not so much Buddhism. They just say, well, there really is no good or evil, and this world is kind of ephemeral anyway, and it doesn't really matter. The more attached you are to the good things of this world, the more you're less enlightened and so forth. So you just need to detach from it all. And I don't find that existentially fulfilling. Some people do. More power to them, I guess. But for those people who are like me and they don't find that to be a satisfactory answer, this is my layman's best, attempt. Forgive me if it doesn't really work out for you, but it's what I've got. First of all, this problem doesn't exist unless you have God, because if you don't have God, well, that's just the way things are, and don't worry about it, who cares? Life sucks, then you die. But if you have God, then, okay, it's a legitimate challenge to faith. So we have to have God. So if God exists, and by God I mean some being who is omnipotent, omniscient, and all-loving. And by omnipotent I mean has all power to do that which he wills, and that which is logically possible. Even God can't make married bachelors. I have it on authority from an atheist philosophy professor that is the case. That is not a restriction on power. That is a restriction on logic. No amount of power can overcome illogic. In omniscient, he can know everything. He can plan everything from infinity past to infinity future, if infinity was actually a real concept. And all-loving, which means he treats love as the highest possible ethic. Now, if you have a God, and you want... Just imagine you're a God, and what you want is a universe. You want a physical universe with creatures in it that are dynamic, that are immortal, that are part of your family, and you want them to be brought into existence and, to be with you and your heavenly family, the divine council and all the like, angels and so on. But you want them to be physical and have bodies and so forth. And we kind of have to assume that that's what God wanted. Not purely because of the Bible, but because, again, if we're presuming God exists, and I'm pretty sure we're all going to presume that we exist, otherwise what am I doing here? Then that seems to be what he wanted. Okay? Because we're here. Now, all we can do with this is make some assumptions. We have to make some bare base assumptions. And so, if that's what you want, then you have to have a universe where it's a dynamic universe that gives rise to such creatures. It has to be a changing, evolving universe. It has to start from some finite point and then expand and then make planets form, and then these planets have to form, and they have to have, through whatever means that God has set up in the physics of the universe, to bring about life, and that life has to be able to evolve into something one day that could resemble a being that God would make in his image, to declare to be a being that he wanted to give authority to, and that he wanted to help and love and bring into his family. He would have to have at some point had all this happen. And the only way that I can imagine that happen is the way that science tells us that it happened. That there was a big bang, and that the universe expanded through that process, and somehow life got here. And that it evolved. And here's kind of the thing about evolution. You have to die. Like, the previous life forms have to die to make room for the new life forms. That's just physically how it must be. And so if God wants us to be dynamic, evolving, changing beings that can live a life and then come to know him within that life, and to join him in his family, then it seems to me it is logically and physically necessary for us to die. At least for now, for the time being, we have to die. Like, there just isn't room on the earth for every creature that has ever lived. And not only is there not room, there just isn't the matter, there isn't the organic matter that exists in a proper ecosystem that can withstand things that just don't die. And manifestly, the physics of the universe have made it this way. It is not possible for a human to have perfectly replicating cells ad infinitum. It just cannot be that way. Eventually, you have to die. The brain cannot remember forever every new experience. Eventually, you must die. And if you eventually must die, then you're probably going to die some sooner and some later. Some from earthquake and disease, which disease is necessary because physics allows for that to be a possibility. I would argue that the same physics that allows us to breathe and have children and eat wonderful smelling food is the same physics that necessarily gives rise to disease, to earthquakes, to meteor strikes, to every other kind of thing, dementia, Ebola, all the different things that can hurt us and kill us are all part of the same necessary system that gives us life to start with, and you cannot separate those, at least for now. And so, we live in this universe. And if this universe is better for having humans in it, and I would argue that it is, then it is necessarily a better universe than where humans don't. And if you can think of a way to create a universe that gives rise to humans, that somehow humans, as soon as they're made, just don't die, and they don't suffer, and they don't get sick, and you can somehow design such a thing, I mean, sure, I guess you've got one over on God, I suppose. But I can't even imagine such a thing existing. I don't think it's logically possible. You'd have to break every kind of law of physics that we have, and then, as far as we can tell, you're just talking nonsense. You're just talking magic and imagination. You're not talking about anything that could be real and tangible in the world. Manifestly, if you're going by the Bible and most ancient religions, God already had other children that were immortal, that were not subject to evolution, that didn't die, at least yet. And for whatever reason, he didn't find that satisfactory. He created those on purpose. They're there. He loves them, but he wanted something else in addition. So he made us. For whatever reason. He has his own reasons for that, I would imagine. We're here. Again, we're assuming God exists, and we're assuming we exist. And, if he wanted to make beings ex nihilo, fully formed, that don't die, I suppose he could have. But that isn't what he wanted. It would not be a universe even as we can conceive, let alone this one. And so I would suggest that it is better that humans live than that they don't. And any other universe where we cannot die, we cannot live, and any way we cannot live is worse than this one, so this universe is better than that one. It may have therefore been completely impossible for God to have make a universe that has any semblance to a coherent one, that where we don't evolve and die and live and give birth. And as a result, you can't have it be free of all natural suffering. And again, it was better that we'd be here than that God just didn't bother. If also love is to be the highest ethic, then I wrote here in my notes that freedom of choice is then the engine that moves that ethic. You cannot truly love someone unless you are free not to. And that will open the door, however slightly, or however widely, to hate, murder, envy, strife, war, starvation, intentional and unintentional, arguments, all manner of terrible things that we do to one another are necessary. They are logically necessary in order for us to be capable of achieving the highest moral good, which is love. Because you can't force someone to have love. It's by definition impossible. It's like saying, you can tolerate something that you love. Well, you might tolerate something that you hate about something you love. Like, I tolerate the fact that my children sometimes refuse to eat their suppers. But I love my children. I have to tolerate that in order to love them. But I don't tolerate... No one ever said, I tolerate my children giving me hugs, unless they're psychologically very odd. No, they like that. You can't tolerate something which you like. Much like you can't love something which you cannot hate. It is not possible to do. And any other world where we don't have the freedom to hate and murder and so forth one another is an inferior world, because it is a world where we were not free to love. Now there's a possible theistic objection to this, which is, or even an atheistic one that says, but don't your scriptures say that one day we will no longer murder and we will no longer die and so forth? And the answer to that is yes. In the due time, humans will evolve, change, learn to love God properly, and through a lot of heartache, finally learn the hard lessons that he had set out to teach us. Now, that only happens when we have existences that go on forever. The idea to me that somehow as soon as we get to heaven we are instantaneously perfect, and just don't know anything about sin and just don't do it anymore and everything is just totally hunky-dory again. I don't believe that. I don't think so. I think that in heaven there will be a hammering out process. There will be a process by which, throughout the judgment of all people, we will come kicking and screaming to understand exactly how we did everything right and how we did everything wrong. And we will come to understand crystal clear and perfectly how we ought to act in the future. And then, much like a parent that would never eat, like an adult that would never eat mud because they know that it's bad for them, but unlike a child who might, because they don't, we will be able to look at all sorts of sin and envy and greed and selfishness and remember how painful it is, and remember how much hurt it causes. And we will know everything that happened in humanity's history. And we will simply choose not to do it anymore, because we will fully comprehend, not just in a moment, but in a long view of history, exactly how bad all of that is. That's my best answer. I call this, someone may have already come up with more or less the same argument. I refer to it as the best possible universe argument, in that we suffer because this is the best that can be done. It is not possible for any other universe to have existed. Every universe that could ever possibly exist that would be good ultimately becomes this one. And, maybe that's not enough. Maybe that isn't satisfying. But that's the best I can do. Have a good day.